to hell or go to heaven.
It looked like just another sci-fi noir flick. Futuristic skylines, rain-soaked streets, and a detective chasing shadows. But Blade Runner was far stranger and far riskier than anyone expected. Studio interference that nearly destroyed Ridley Scott's vision. Sets built under secrecy, with designs that pushed the limits of imagination. A tone caught between detective mystery and dystopian nightmare that left early audiences baffled. What was meant to be a futuristic gamble turned into one of the most influential cult films ever made, spawning endless debates, sequels, and a legacy no one saw coming. But how close did it come to vanishing into obscurity? What hidden battles shaped the final cut? And what secrets did the cast and crew leave buried in those neon-lit alleys? Prepare to uncover 20 weird facts you never knew about Blade Runner. Weird Fact 1. It was almost called Dangerous Days. The film we know as Blade Runner very nearly carried a different, less iconic title. Early drafts of Hampton Fancher's script floated around Hollywood under the name Dangerous Days. The phrase captured the grim atmosphere of a future Los Angeles, but it lacked the sharp, almost mythic punch the final title carried. That all changed when producer Michael Deeley stumbled upon an obscure novel by William S. Burroughs titled Blade Runner, a movie. It had nothing to do with androids or Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the novel the film was based on. But the title had a strange power to it. Short, futuristic, and unforgettable. The studio bought the rights to the name Ditching Dangerous Days. Ironically, years later, Dangerous Days was resurrected as the title for the definitive behind-the-scenes documentary about the film. What began as a discarded working title became the phrase fans now associate with the chaotic birth of a masterpiece.
You're reading a magazine, you come across a full-page nude photo of a girl.
Is this testing whether I'm a replicant or a lesbian?
Dangerous Days may have been cast aside, but in losing it, Blade Runner found the title that transformed a troubled production into legend. Weird Fact 2. Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott couldn't stand each other. While the rain poured and neon lights flickered on screen, behind the camera, another storm brewed between Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott. Ford, then fresh off his Star Wars and Indiana Jones fame, bristled at Scott's directing style. He felt the English director cared more about the movie's visuals than its characters, leaving actors adrift in a sea of production design. Scott, for his part, was frustrated by Ford's resistance and constant questioning of his vision. Their arguments became legendary, with crew members recalling long silences on set, punctuated by sudden, sharp disagreements. At times, it was said, the tension was so thick you could feel it in the air like smog. Ironically, that off-screen hostility bled into Ford's performance. His Deckard feels world-weary, annoyed, and emotionally distant, a man out of step with the people around him. Whether intentional or not, the battles between actor and director gave us the Deckard audiences still debate over 4 decades later. Clashing visions nearly tore Blade Runner apart, but that same friction forged the weary, distant Deckard, who endures as one of sci-fi's most enigmatic heroes. Weird Fact 3. The studio forced that infamous voiceover. If you saw Blade Runner during its original 1982 release, you didn't just watch the neon-drenched visuals, you listened to a flat, detective-style narration delivered by Harrison Ford. The voiceover wasn't Scott's idea. It was forced by a nervous studio after test screenings left audiences confused. Ford was reportedly furious. He believed the narration insulted the audience's intelligence, spelling out emotions and plot points that the visuals had already made clear. Legend has it, Ford deliberately read the lines as woodenly as possible, hoping the studio would abandon the plan. Instead, they used it anyway, cutting his monotone performance directly into the theatrical version. The result was widely criticized. Critics mocked the voiceover as clumsy and unnecessary, and fans long suspected Ford had sabotaged it. When Ridley Scott released his director's cut in 1992, he stripped it out entirely, proving the film's imagery and atmosphere were powerful enough to tell the story on their own.
She's a replicant, isn't she?
I'm impressed.
The studio forced narration onto Blade Runner, but its failure only proved that the film's images spoke louder than any words ever could. Weird Fact 4. The Unicorn Dream changed film history. For years, fans argued over one of Blade Runner's most mysterious moments, the Unicorn Dream. In Ridley Scott's version, Deckard dreams of a unicorn running through a forest. A surreal sequence that seems out of place until the film's final scene. There, Edward James Olmos's character, Gaff, leaves behind a tiny origami unicorn. The meaning is explosive. It suggests Gaff knew Deckard's private dreams, implying Deckard himself might be a replicant with implanted memories. The studio originally cut the dream, worried it would confuse audiences, but Scott fought to restore it, believing it was the key to the film's deeper meaning. That brief image became one of the most hotly debated scenes in science fiction history. For decades, fans have argued over whether Deckard is human or artificial. A debate that continues to this day. Without the unicorn, Blade Runner would have been just a stylish thriller. With it, the film became a philosophical riddle. The unicorn turned Blade Runner from a noir thriller into a lifelong riddle, forever blurring the line between human and machine. Weird Fact 5. Deckard wasn't the first choice for the lead. It's almost impossible to imagine anyone but Harrison Ford trudging through the rain-soaked alleys of Los Angeles 2019. Yet Ford wasn't the first name tied to the role. In fact, the studio initially pursued Dustin Hoffman. The actor was intrigued, but clashed with Scott's vision, pushing for a radically different take on the character. Other names floated through the casting pool included Al Pacino, Gene Hackman, and even Jack Nicholson. Each brought their own baggage, and none felt quite right for the dark, film noir detective at the heart of the story. The project hung in limbo, its future uncertain as stars circled but refused to commit. When Harrison Ford finally stepped in, the role shifted. Deckard became less neurotic and more hardened, a man carrying exhaustion like armor. Ford's reluctant hero defined the character so completely that today, it feels absurd to think of anyone else chasing replicants through the neon haze of the future.
Seeing things you people wouldn't believe.
Deckard could have worn many faces, but it was Harrison Ford's weary resolve that gave Blade Runner its soul and secured the film's place in cinematic history. Weird Fact 6. The replicants were cast against all odds. Casting. The replicants was nearly as chaotic as creating them. Rutger Hauer was Ridley Scott's first choice for Roy Batty, but the studio balked. They didn't see the blonde Dutch actor, fired from European films, as a marketable villain for American audiences. Scott pushed hard, insisting Hauer brought both beauty and menace, the kind of duality the character demanded. Sean Young, meanwhile, was cast as Rachel, despite having little experience. Her youth clashed with Ford's world-weariness, creating real tension that only heightened their on-screen chemistry. Then there was Daryl Hannah, who shattered her elbow while performing a gymnastics stunt, forcing the crew to hide her injury during filming. None of them were the obvious studio choices, yet those performances, icy, unhinged, tragic, became unforgettable. Against all odds, the replicants stole the film, their vulnerability making them more human than the humans hunting them. What looked like risky casting decisions ended up defining the very soul of Blade Runner. The studio doubted the replicants' cast, but those risky choices gave Blade Runner its most haunting humanity. Weird fact 7. Rutger Hauer wrote his own final lines. The climax of Blade Runner hinges on a speech many critics call one of the greatest in film history. As Roy Batty sits in the rain, holding a dove, he delivers a haunting monologue about memories fading like tears in rain. The twist? Rutger Hauer rewrote it himself the night before shooting. The original script was long and technical, filled with heavy-handed sci-fi jargon. Hauer thought it lacked poetry. On set, he trimmed the speech, then improvised lines that distilled Roy's experience into something raw and universal. His version transformed Batty from a villain into a tragic, almost saintly figure. Ridley Scott later admitted he hadn't planned it that way, but Hauer's instincts elevated the scene beyond anything on the page. That moment, born from an actor's last-minute rewrite, became immortal. What could have been clunky exposition instead gave cinema one of its most heartbreaking farewells.
Tears in rain.
Rutger Hauer's rewrite turned a villain's farewell into poetry, giving Blade Runner its most immortal moment in the rain. Weird fact 8. Sean Young's on-set battles became legendary. Sean Young was just 22 when she landed the role of Rachel, a replicant who doesn't know she's artificial. Off-screen, though, her inexperience often clashed with the grueling demands of production. She argued with Ford, struggled with Scott's perfectionism, and endured crew gossip that painted her as difficult. The tension grew so sharp that some crew members openly rooted against her. Ford reportedly lost patience during their love scene, leading to what critics now controversially call the rape kiss, a moment that played uncomfortably even in 1982. Young herself later described the atmosphere as hostile, saying she felt isolated during the entire shoot. Yet, her performance endured. Rachel's cold, porcelain exterior cracking into tenderness remains one of the most memorable parts of the film. The behind-the-scenes hostility may have scarred her career, but on screen, Sean Young gave Blade Runner its most haunting love story. Sean Young's battles behind the scenes may have scarred her career, but her fragile, unforgettable Rachel became Blade Runner's most haunting love story. Weird fact 9. The city was built from trash and smoke. The futuristic Los Angeles of Blade Runner wasn't built with sleek CGI. It was created from garbage, smoke, and clever illusion. Production designer Lawrence G. Paul and concept artist Sid Mead scavenged materials from scrapyards, dressing old sets with neon tubing, broken electronics, and endless layers of grit. The result wasn't shiny. It was claustrophobic and suffocating. To hide the small scale of the sets, Scott filled them with steam, artificial rain, and towering matte paintings. Miniatures extended the skyline, while the ground-level streets looked overcrowded thanks to extras jammed into tight spaces. Every frame looked alive, buzzing with background chaos. What looked like a sprawling futuristic metropolis was, in reality, a patchwork of leftovers. Yet, it worked. That dense, lived-in aesthetic would later inspire entire genres, from cyberpunk anime like Akira to video games like Cyberpunk 2077. The city of the future was built from yesterday's trash, and it changed visual storytelling forever. Blade Runner's City of the Future was built from junk and smoke, yet it redefined sci-fi and inspired generations. Weird Fact 10. It secretly reused sets from other sci-fi films. Look closely, and you'll notice Blade Runner's Los Angeles has a strangely familiar skeleton. That's because the production reused sets from earlier sci-fi projects to save money. The most famous was the New York street from The Jazz Singer, 1927, later recycled in countless Warner Brothers films. With some smoke, neon signs, and futuristic billboards, it suddenly became the streets of 2019 Los Angeles. Other elements came from dismantled sets of Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Silent Running. Even parts of the iconic Bradbury Building interiors had been used in film noir classics decades earlier. Scott embraced the recycled look, arguing it made the city feel layered and authentic, like a place built on top of its own past. Far from cheapening the film, this scavenger approach gave Blade Runner its unique texture. The city wasn't a clean slate. It was a palimpsest of history. A future literally built on the bones of cinema's past.
Not yet.
Blade Runner's future was built from Hollywood's past, turning recycled sets into a city layered with history and cinematic memory. Weird Fact 11. Vangelis's score was almost lost forever. The eerie, dreamlike soundscape of Blade Runner wouldn't exist without Vangelis, the Greek composer who had just won an Oscar for Chariots of Fire. His synthesizer-driven score became the heartbeat of the film. But what most people don't know is that it almost vanished into obscurity. Vangelis worked obsessively in his London studio, layering electronic textures with mournful saxophone solos and shimmering synths. Yet, after the film's release, the soundtrack was withheld for years due to disputes between Vangelis and the studio. Bootlegs circulated, but fans had no official way to experience the music outside the film. By the time an official release finally arrived in the 90s, the score had already achieved legendary status among collectors. It wasn't just background music, it was the sound of the future, forever tied to the rain-soaked streets of Los Angeles 2019. Without Vangelis, Blade Runner wouldn't have been half as haunting.
This is for Zora. This is for Chris.
Vangelis's score nearly disappeared, but when it finally surfaced, it proved timeless, haunting enough to define Blade Runner's soul for generations. Weird Fact 12. The Tyrell Building was a miniature masterpiece. On screen, the Tyrell Corporation towers look impossibly vast, pyramids of concrete stretching into the heavens. But the truth is, they were only a few feet tall. Built as large-scale miniatures, the models were meticulously detailed with tiny windows, glowing lights, and layers of painted texture to trick the eye. Special effects legend Douglas Trumbull oversaw the process, using forced perspective and lighting to sell the illusion. The models were combined with matte paintings and optical effects, creating skyscrapers that dwarfed the audience even though they barely filled a studio space. When combined with smoke and spotlights, the Tyrell pyramids looked colossal, oppressive, and timeless. The miniature work was so convincing that even modern audiences often mistake them for digital effects. Decades later, the Tyrell Building remains a testament to practical effects artistry, proof that sometimes the biggest illusions are built with the smallest models. The Tyrell Towers weren't digital marvels, but miniature masterpieces, small models that built one of cinema's most unforgettable illusions. Weird Fact 13. The film had 7 different cuts. Few films have lived as many lives as Blade Runner. After its troubled release, the movie went through no fewer than 7 official versions. The 1982 theatrical cut included the forced voiceover and a tacked-on happy ending. International audiences got a slightly more violent edit. Then came television versions, sneak previews, and work prints, all slightly different. The most famous resurrection came in 1992, when Warner Brothers accidentally screened a rough cut at a Los Angeles film festival. Fans were stunned. It was darker, moodier, and lacked the hated narration. Ridley Scott eventually oversaw his director's cut, restoring the unicorn dream and altering the ending. Finally, in 2007, Scott released the final cut, his definitive version with cleaned-up visuals and minor tweaks. Today, debates rage over which version is the real Blade Runner. Each cut offers a slightly different lens on the same story, turning one film into 7 competing legends.
My birthday is April 10, 2017. How long do I live? 4 years.
Blade Runner's many cuts turned one film into 7 competing legends, each reshaping how audiences interpret its rain-soaked future. Weird fact 14. The ending you saw was stolen from another movie. The theatrical ending of Blade Runner, where Deckard and Rachel drive off into the countryside, wasn't shot for the film at all. After test audiences rejected Scott's bleak finale, the studio demanded a more hopeful conclusion. Lacking the budget for new material, Warner Brothers raided their archives. The sweeping landscape shots at the end of Blade Runner were actually leftover footage from Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The same helicopter shots of mountainous terrain that opened Kubrick's horror classic were repurposed to suggest freedom and escape. For years, audiences assumed it was part of Scott's vision, but in reality, he hated it, calling it a betrayal of the film's tone. The happy ending now feels jarringly out of place, especially compared to Scott's darker cuts. What was meant to soften the blow instead highlighted the studio's meddling in one of cinema's boldest experiments.
Those aren't your memories, they're somebody else's. They're Tyrell's nieces.
Blade Runner's happy ending, borrowed from Kubrick, became a notorious mark of studio interference. Weird fact 15. Real rain and neon nearly killed the crew. The atmosphere of Blade Runner is unforgettable. Endless rain cascading over neon-lit streets. But making that vision a reality nearly broke the crew. Instead of relying on stage tricks, Scott insisted on real water pouring from overhead rigs. The constant soaking turned the set into a freezing, hazardous swamp. Actors and crew shivered through take after take, drenched to the bone. Equipment shorted out, lights exploded, and wires sparked dangerously in the wet environment. Ford later joked that the shoot was less like a movie set and more like a survival course. Yet, the misery paid off. The rain became iconic, giving Los Angeles a sense of decay and gloom no special effect could replicate. The crew may have cursed Scott's obsession at the time, but decades later, his dedication turned discomfort into cinematic immortality. Scott's relentless rain soaked the set and crew, but it gave Blade Runner its unforgettable, decayed Los Angeles. Weird fact 16. The origami unicorn was added last minute. The origami unicorn is one of Blade Runner's most hotly debated symbols. Does it mean Deckard is a replicant, or was it just a quirk of gaffe? The truth is, it wasn't even in the original plan. Ridley Scott came up with the idea late in production, tying it to the unicorn dream sequence that was added during editing. Edward James Olmos, who played Gaff, crafted the tiny paper unicorns himself, giving them a personal touch. The prop was simple, but loaded with meaning. If Gaff knew about Deckard's dreams, then Deckard's memories weren't his own. This single folded piece of paper turned the film's ending into a puzzle that fans have argued over for 40 years. What began as a last-minute addition became the key to the movie's biggest mystery.
You think I'm a replicant, don't you?
The origami unicorn wasn't planned. It became Blade Runner's ultimate mystery, hinting Deckard might be a replicant with implanted dreams. Weird. Fact 17. Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott. Barely spoke on-screen, Deckard is brooding and detached. But off-screen, that mood wasn't just acting. Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott clashed constantly during filming. Ford disliked Scott's controlling style and often disagreed with his direction. Their relationship soured so badly that they barely spoke outside of takes. Ford later admitted he was frustrated with the endless night shoots, heavy rain, and Scott's perfectionism. Meanwhile, Scott felt Ford didn't fully understand the philosophical depth he wanted to explore. The tension is visible in Ford's performance, weary, cynical, and borderline hostile. Ironically, that friction may have worked in the film's favor. Deckard's world weariness felt authentic because Ford himself was living it. What could have been a disaster became part of the film's raw, lived-in energy.
The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and you have burned so very, very brightly, Roy.
Ford and Scott clashed off-screen, but their tension fueled Deckard's weary, world-weary performance, adding authenticity to Blade Runner. Weird fact 18. The spinner cars actually worked. The futuristic flying cars, known as spinners, weren't just static props, they were partially functional. Special effects teams built full-sized models with hydraulics that lifted, tilted, and rotated as if preparing for takeoff. The interiors were wired with glowing panels, blinking lights, and steering systems to sell the illusion. For wide shots, smaller-scale miniatures were used, suspended by wires against matte-painted skylines. Combined with smoke and lighting effects, the spinners looked like real, mass-produced vehicles of the future. Though they never actually flew, the cars were engineered to move just enough for actors to climb in and cameras to capture them believably. Even today, the spinners feel futuristic, not cartoonish, proving that practical ingenuity can make sci-fi technology look timeless. The spinners weren't real planes, just glowing, tilting models, but clever effects made them look fully futuristic. Weird fact. The test screenings were a disaster. When Warner Brothers first tested Blade Runner with audiences, the results were catastrophic. Viewers complained it was too slow, too dark, and too confusing. The studio panicked, convinced that audiences wouldn't sit through a philosophical sci-fi noir. In response, they demanded changes, a clunky voiceover narration to explain the story, extra violence for the international cut, and the infamous happy ending. Scott resisted, but his control over the project had already slipped away. The irony? The very elements that critics hated in '82 are now what fans love most. The brooding pace, the ambiguity, and the lack of answers make Blade Runner unique. What began as a box office disappointment transformed into a cultural touchstone, precisely because it refused to be easy. What failed in 1982 became iconic by rebellion. Blade Runner thrived by refusing to conform. Darkness and ambiguity turned a flop into a timeless masterpiece. Weird fact 20. It took decades to become a classic. When Blade Runner premiered in 1982, it was considered a flop. Overshadowed by E.T. and dismissed by critics, it barely made back its budget. But in the years that followed, its reputation grew through home video, midnight screenings, and fan devotion. By the 1990s, it was hailed as a masterpiece, influencing countless films, TV shows, and even architecture. Cyberpunk, as we know it, from The Matrix to Ghost in the Shell, wouldn't exist without it. Today, Blade Runner is preserved in the U.S. National Film Registry, officially recognized as culturally and historically significant. The film's journey mirrors its themes, misunderstood in its time, searching for meaning, and ultimately proving its humanity. From box office failure to timeless legend, Blade Runner didn't just imagine the future, it became part of it. From flop to futurist icon, Blade Runner proved that time can turn doubt into devotion. Its legacy isn't just cinema, it's a blueprint for the future. Blade Runner wasn't just a sci-fi film, it was a risk, a fractured vision of the future that almost didn't survive the present. But its endurance turned it into something greater, a haunting legend that still shapes cinema today. Maybe that's why it keeps drawing us back, because it proves that even the most misunderstood films can outlive their time. If this revealed a side of Blade Runner you didn't know, share your favorite weird fact in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe for more untold stories from the films that refuse to die. Remember, some futures were never meant to fade.